I actually have a bit of a story for you guys, a little one. Sorry, a little bit of a changing gears. It's a bit of a funny story, but it's okay. Jesus likes to laugh as well. After university in Canada, I had a 5-week French immersion course that I jumped into in rural Quebec in the town of Chicoutimi, and it was super strict immersion. You got sent home if you got caught speaking English from this 5-week course. So it was like French only, and I spoke basically no French. So there was a cultural option a few times a week you could choose, and the one I chose was French-Canadian line dancing, which I really enjoyed. They taught us the steps of this French-Canadian line dance, and we were learning the moves every session. But one day the teacher wasn't there, and as we looked around the room, somehow nobody else knew the moves to this dance yet, except for me. And I didn't know how to speak any French, and everyone's like, what are we going to do? There's no other way. Ryan, you have to run this class. And I was like, okay, oui, so à la gauche, et le droit, comme ça. Trying to teach people this line dance with no French under my belt other than a few words. And it's a very memorable moment for me because we pulled through. You know, I had caught the heart of the dance. I actually knew the moves, but I just couldn't speak the language. And so that ties in this morning, gifts of the Spirit. Part of our vineyard flavor is that everybody gets to play around here. And some of you have just been waiting for this invitation to contribute your charismatic gifts around the place. Awesome. Some of us are still trying to figure out what it looks like to play. And that's where we come this morning. This series has mostly looked at Paul's list of gifts in 1 Corinthians, you know, the punchy ones. And you can see them up here on the left. Those are the ones we've been focusing on. And we're a diverse bunch. We've had some interesting perspectives and some great expertise. You know, we've had Annette Harvey come, really selling the gifts of tongues, among others. This might be what her page would look like. Yep, Annette Harvey. And then we had Aaron Hardy and Sharon, in their own ways, come up and deeply share their love of the prophetic. Again, their page might look a bit like this. Which then makes you think, well, what's next, guys? Next slide. Maybe a little bit of healing, miracles, discerning of spirits. That would make sense, right? No, today you have Ryan Carson-Maker. Here's my list. It's funny, because for most of my life, I have only seen the sensible gifts at play in my church experience. I don't know what to do with the weird ones. I don't have any models growing up of this stuff. And so I hope some of you can relate. I'm not the only one here. Because then I joined the Vineyard. Here we are. I started reading and watching John Wimber's stuff, the founder of the Vineyard, and I started seeing the scriptures with new eyes. Man, I used to think I could just change the world by talking and making sense, you know, convincing people of stuff, explaining stuff, which is a good start. But I've realized it is not enough. You know, we're up against dark spiritual powers and authorities in this world, and we need more than human wisdom and human words. We need his power. I need his power. I don't want half of the Spirit. So I've learned what it means to be with Jesus. I love the secret place. I have learned what it means to become like Jesus. He's shaping me ongoing. But what about do what Jesus did? You know, I want to play. And so today I bring you a 2-point sermon. Where did Paul get the concept of the spiritual gifts? Where did it come from? And what do we do to join in? Now this includes a great guest testimony this morning and a bit of a surprising prayer gift at the end. So watch the space. But we're going to jump right in. Imagine Paul. And imagine what he's seeing. Where did the gifts of the Spirit come from for him? How did he know what to write to those churches? You know, the lists that he wrote, are they exhaustive? Are they the lists? Where'd they come from? So imagine being Paul in that time, writing to the churches. You know the Hebrew Scriptures intimately. You've heard the life and teachings of Jesus. But there's weird stuff going on. Peter the fisherman is preaching boldly and healing people with his shadow. Philip is converting Africans and teleporting around the Middle East. The Corinthian meetings are in chaos with ordinary people manifesting the Spirit in all sorts of weird ways. So how does Paul put this together? And so we're going to go on a journey together through the Scriptures. Starting on page 1 of the Bible. Yeah. The first mention of the Spirit is on page 1 when God creates the world. And then he breathes life into his people. Spirit and breath are the same word in Hebrew. So there's a sense of creativity, presence, page 1. The second main mention of the Spirit is when he fills a Bezalel to create. And why does he create a beautiful tabernacle? It's a place for God's presence to dwell with his people. So this is a lot about the work of the Spirit. Craftsmanship, the Spirit's eminently practical. Creativity, the Spirit thinks outside the box. And presence, he wants to be with us. And you can see wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skills, words that might sound familiar from Paul's list. We jump ahead then to the judges and the kings. We have characters like Othniel, Gideon, Samson, King David. And you can see on the lines there that the Spirit filled them. Was his Spirit reserved for the spiritual elite? No. He often chose the unexpected from this list. But yet we see wisdom, leadership, strength. Let's take a look at some of the miraculous in the Old Testament. We have big names like Moses, Elijah, and Elisha. Heaps of miracles, all sorts of exciting stuff. The Spirit empowering these men to do interesting things. You can have a quick scan of the list. But on the next slide, again, you'll see there's just miracles scattered across the Old Testament stories. It's not uncommon to see God do miraculous things through his people. Next, we have a look at prophecy. Some had a long-term prophetic role. People like Samuel, Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, the big names. But there were also heaps of prophets. I hadn't really realized this. Like for example, there were 100 prophets hidden in a cave during Jezebel's reign. Those are just the ones who escaped the sword. There were prophets everywhere. And who got to be a prophet. Many of them came from the spiritual elite, the priests and the royal court, but there were some who came from very common origins. Elisha, the plowman, Amos, the fig farmer, until the Spirit came and rested on them. Right? And we also have one-off prophecies, not just in the New Testament, but in the Old. 70 of Moses' elders were filled with the Spirit, once off to prophesy. Saul, when he was anointed king, was filled with the Spirit, and once off prophesied, and they didn't prophesy again. It's an interesting mix. You can see some of the lines there. Then we'll have a look at some of the prophecies that maybe were bouncing around Paul's head from Isaiah. A spirit of wisdom and understanding, counsel and might, knowledge and the fear of the Lord will be poured out on the Messiah. Some language in there you might see in some of Paul's lists of the gift. Joel, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. I'll pour out my Spirit in those days. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Again, some familiar aspects we see in there. Then we have a look at Jesus. He came and he said the Spirit will come. The Spirit will teach you. The Spirit will guide you. The Spirit will remind you. You will do even greater things than these. And he gave his disciples authority to heal, cast out demons, and to preach. Healing, discernment of spirits, teaching, miracles. Paul didn't make this stuff up. Again, looking at Jesus, we look at his healing ministry. His healing playbook is frustratingly devoid of patterns. What do we make of the wet willies, the mud in the eyes, healing from miles away? He just does what he sees his Father doing. He says to Nicodemus, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. You can't control the Spirit. You can't package the Spirit. But yet, everyone born of the Spirit gets caught up in this surprising Spirit-led life, free from human control. He says, let anyone who's thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from them. Well, what is that living water? I've often thought, like good deeds, maybe sharing the gospel, some encouraging words. But actually, John doesn't leave that wiggle room. He says, by this he meant the Spirit, the water, whom those who believed in him would later receive. Everyone. And so this would surely bring Paul back to Ezekiel's vision of water flowing from the temple, growing deeper and bringing life wherever it flows. This is profound, life-changing impact from the temple, the presence of God in that Ezekiel picture. And so imagine the picture here. The Old Testament vision might have sounded like God's going to bring the life-giving stuff himself. But Jesus says, I am the source of the life-giving water, the temple, that's me, and you are next to me, and out of you is flowing a river of life, the Spirit. That's amazing. Is it for the spiritual elite? He says, no, whoever believes. The partnership and the power of the Spirit. It's a remarkable image. And I love, thank you, ChatGPT, for making this beautiful picture for me. I think it's stunning. This brings us to some of the things that Paul might have seen in his day. What does this living water look like? Well, just look to Pentecost. Dramatic manifestations of the Spirit, bold and insightful preaching, thousands cut to the heart, people speaking in tongues. Look to the early church. We just have the most amazing things happening. Peter, the apostle, Stephen, Philip, Ananias, Cornelius, and Paul working in the most amazing and wonderful signs and miracles all over the place. So, again, imagine you're Paul and you know all of these things. How do you then pass on to people, what is the Spirit up to? So just take a moment and think in your mind. Try to think, start from scratch, think fresh. From all you've seen there, what are some of the common themes? What would you pull out? Just take a minute and imagine what would go in your list about how does the Spirit work. I'm going to suggest to you what I found. I think we see that the Spirit works through people, partnership. He empowers all people to do things they could not do alone, and that it's situational, contextual. He meets the needs of the moment, and it's clearly for the greater good and for His glory. It's amazing. And in fact, it's really helpful to think about what the Scriptures do not point at. All right? Here's what they don't point at to me. The Spirit does not often work unilaterally. He works through people. He doesn't just empower the spiritual elite. He works through everybody. He doesn't rely on human skill, ability, and control because He's providing the power. He's not predictable. He doesn't follow the script, and it's not about personal prestige. I find this really helpful. When it comes to the gifts of the Spirit has been doing all these things from the beginning. It's just most of the things on Paul's list were quite rare. Only happening to one in a million, which at the time was exciting when it happens, but things have changed. Man, Jesus has sent His Spirit for all. And from what I can see, the Spirit is willing to do any of His stuff with Paul's list from anybody, and we all get to play. This is us. Yeah, that's exciting. Just ponder that picture. You're in there. We're all in there. We all get to play. So I hope you can see that when we look to Paul's writings to figure out what's going on here, he's blending these Jewish categories for the work of the Spirit with the Spirit-empowered experience of the new church in a way that is new, but he's grounded it. He has just given a name to the diverse and powerful manifestations of the Spirit, and he's called them gifts. And so I imagine inside Paul's head, he's like, the Spirit's creative. The Spirit is practical. The Spirit is life-giving. The Spirit is surprising and beyond human control, and He's at work in all people. And that's why I think when we look at the way he uses these words, you can see on his list here, the different gifts he lists in different bits of his letters. At first it can seem confusing. You're like, well, what is it, Paul? What are the gifts? But he uses this word gifts quite fluidly. Right? Sometimes he's referring to supernatural abilities, like in the first part of 1 Corinthians 12. Sometimes he's talking about practical skills that people are going to use, like at the end of the chapter. Sometimes, like in Romans, he's talking about how the Spirit empowers people to serve. And other times in Ephesians, he's talking about how the Spirit empowers people to lead and equip others. It's all part of the package, man. And so an analogy that I think brings it all together for us is Paul used some biology talk in his letter. He ties it together in this church as a body. But of course, the sciences have evolved from that time. I like this image of church as a body 2.0, cellular biology version. Okay, stick with me here. We've got muscle cells, skin cells, white cells, red blood cells, sperm cells, nerve cells, egg cells. It can get a little awkward because you're like, ooh, any volunteers for the sperm cell? The tenacious, perky, always on the move. Okay, just don't focus too much on that. But you get the idea, okay? We all have a role to play. Specialized cells are great. Neat and tidy. Everybody has their job to do. But have you ever heard of stem cells? Next slide, please. Stem cells are cells that can form into any type of specialized cell. One stem cell can become anything. And it's a really powerful image. I think we are the Lord's stem cells. Think about it. What is stopping the Spirit from working through you as He sees fit today? Giving you a word of knowledge, an unction to pray for healing, eyes to see demonic influence, eyes to see a spirit at work. We see it on the pages of Scripture. We see it around the world and people who have eyes to see and faith to respond. And we are seeing it here in this church. You might be, oh, no, I'm just a muscle cell. I'm just a neuron. An encourager, a helper, a teacher. And yes, that is true. But also, I think, a stem cell, ready to do whatever He wants to do. John Wimber said this really well. He said, we are all touched by the Spirit in certain ways at certain times. Most of us either have not known that or have not known what to do with it. So it is that many of us have experienced a moving of the Spirit and have suppressed it. The manifestation of the Spirit is not supposed to be the exception. It's supposed to be the norm. To how many of us does God give the spiritual gifts? To everyone. Someone might think, no, not to me. What Paul is talking about hasn't ever happened to me. Well, my answer is yes, it has. You just didn't have the theology, the practice, or the encouragement to recognize it and respond. And I think, wow, John, I think you might be right. So I think it might be deceptively simple. We have this huge list of gifts, but I think if we come to him with ears to hear his voice and a heart ready to obey, I think he's ready to do anything through anybody, you and me. Water, living water, flowing out of everyone. So I'd love to invite James up at this point, our secret guest, to share what is it like to hear and obey. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Ryan. Morning, church. So it was actually a year ago, just after the first 10 days of praying as Pentecost, and I was like, I need to pray more. Like, that was just amazing. And Maria's like, you should go to the prayer meetings. And the only one that worked was the intercessory prayer, because she was going to the silent prayer, community prayer. So I started going along to the intercessory prayer with Blair, Adam, Johnny, Dennis, and a few others. And so just as I was turning up week by week, praying for revival, praying for the city, God just started to strip back my heart. Like, he would just bring me to my knees, and he would just start to pour his love in me and sort of start changing things in my heart. And I kind of started to realize that God wanted my heart before he was going to answer my prayers. And then God started just giving me this heart for people that I didn't even know. And so I was struck with this thought that came to me. It's like, what would it look like to love the least, the last, and the lost? The people for which there's no glory, the people that it's hard. And at the same time, Miriam had been doing a lot of work through the cyclone recovery through the Manawara Hawke's Bay Trust. And I started just helping her with some things. And we had this, she was looking at the homeless situation and like, where can we help? Where can we help? And so she had this crazy idea. And so one day we got a crock pot of food, we jumped in the back of our car and we just drove around the beach just to find, whoever we could find, because there's a whole lot of people sleeping in their cars at that time. So I found the least scariest, oldest guy that I could, and I went up to him and I gave him a meal, and he just started sharing his story. And we were just quite blown away that people were so open, and we just kept going back week after week, most weeks, and we've been doing that for 8 months now. And it's just a crazy, crazy journey. We just go out with tea, coffee, some snacks, sometimes meals, and we have served close to 60 people, individual people, over that time. It's just been a real gradual process, just learning to be confident and just seeing God turn up in just crazy ways. Like on the third week, I was going to chat to this young guy, and his whole car was full of Bibles. And I was like, man, I thought I was going to bring Jesus here, but you're already here. God's already at work. He's already meeting people. He's already working in people's lives. We just see so many needs. It's just like hard to grapple, the immense need out there in the community. But God just began to show us that they are his children. They are his ones that, he is loving. He is just inviting us to come along and be a part of that story, that, he just wants to lead us to where he's already working. Another story just of how God sort of leading me. I was trying to catch up with this guy who was due in court, and I couldn't find him, but just as on my way back to town, I just had this prompting, I'll go and check on so-and-so, see if their car's still parked at the shops. And as I'm heading there, I can see the car's not there. So I go to turn around, and then he's crossing the road right in front of me. And then not only that, but just in front of him is his ex-partner who's just got out of jail a few weeks before, and I didn't know where she was. So I pulled over, said hello to them, and she's like going on, like she's starting to get her life back together. And God just, that little prompting led me to just cross paths with these people just as I'm going about my day. Like God he just miraculously leads me. And he's been growing my confidence. And it's just like kind of like Ryan was saying, it's not in what I do. Like, this is not me. I'm not like a out there kind of person putting myself out there. But I'm growing a confidence not in what I'm doing, but in who God is, in who he is and what he is doing. Like, he's just confirmed to me over and over, he will do this. He will lead. He will lead. It's not like God's given me direct instructions, go down the street, walk down the side street, say such and such to so-and-so. It's just like a little nudge or a little prompt to just, and then it's just a whole lot of stepping out in faith, like not even knowing like what I'm doing. God is directing our steps. I mean, over time we've begun to pray for people, pray for healing, pray for peace, provision, but we haven't seen any miracles yet. Every story is still a work in progress because it's not in our power. It's in His strength. And I'm learning we just need to be obedient to His calling to pray and to go because He'll do the rest. A few weeks ago, I met this other young guy, and I've been reading Jackie Pullinger, I've been reading David Wilkerson and their ministries to the drug addicts and people in the gangs. And this guy started sharing me his story of his living situation, that he's addicted to marijuana. And I was feeling a bit bold that day. So I'm like, well, the only way that I know you can get free is through Jesus. I haven't seen it, but I'm believing for it. And so I just had this opportunity to kind of share the gospel with him and tell him, why did Jesus have to die? And that he can be a new creation. And I prayed for him. And then Jen prayed for him again the next week we saw him. Like he's on a journey just like all the others. And God is just moving. God is on a mission. He is wanting to transform lives and bring His kingdom here. God's not waving a big neon sign like saying, go here, because He's already told us to go. He's already told us in Scripture to go, to preach the gospel, to tend the poor, the widows, the orphans, to seek justice and mercy. It's not been victorious. It's not been glorious. Like, it's hard. I weep over people. It's going to cost you. But God is close to the poor. He is close to the widows and the orphans and the oppressed. And if we want to hear God speak to us, if we want to move in the gifts, then I think we have to go where He is. Like, we have to lay our lives down. We have to pray. We have to surrender. And then we have to go. And then we just got to have to trust that He comes through. So, yeah.
Oh, James, it's just so encouraging to see what God is up to in you guys. And I hope you can feel it in your own heart. You're probably not called to join the Man of Autovan and go out to those particular people. Maybe. But each of us in our own way is called to do things like that in our own spheres. And so let me just wrap up today by moving into the second part of what I promised was a 2-part talk. Part 1, where did Paul get the concept of those gifts? Part 2, what do we do to join in? That's what I want to talk about as we wrap up today. What did James do to join in? What do we do to join in? I think we listen. That's so key. And that can be very hard, discerning God's communication with us, knowing when He wants to do something. But manifesting His gifts, I find it hard to hear too. But I do find it gets easier with practice, and I do find it gets easier with obedience. So let me share 3 perspectives I've found along the way, and you might be able to relate to one. One is from Tyler Staton. He said it like this: like any other thought in my head, only its origin felt somehow like from without rather than from within. Maybe you can relate to that. Dallas Willard, in his book about hearing God, also says it in a quite helpful way. Get ready for some smarty pants vocabulary, okay? It's just the way it is. First of all, he talks about weight. The quality of God's voice is more a matter of the weight or the impact an impression makes on our consciousness. A certain steady and calm force with which communication from God impacts our souls incline us towards assent, even toward active compliance. The weight of God's voice might help us discern which one is His. He also talks about a certain tone, how the voice of God speaking in our souls bears within itself a characteristic spirit. It's a spirit of exalted peacefulness and confidence, of joy, sweet reasonableness, and of goodwill. His voice is not the voice of a bully. It will not run over you and your will. Maybe you can relate to that. He also talks about the sense of authority in God's voice, how we can sense inwardly the immediate power of God's voice. Once we've experienced it, we no longer marvel at how nature and spirits responded to this divine word in scriptural accounts. It's the unquestionable authority with which Jesus spoke and speaks to us. Helpful, he says, perhaps the rough distinction is this: the voice of the subconscious argues with you, tries to convince you, but the inner voice of God does not argue, does not try to convince you. It just speaks, and it is self-authenticating. It has the feel of the voice of God within it. If any of that relates, hold on to that. Third and final, again from Tyler Staton, talks about the God speaking like through our imaginations. he said something along the lines of how it's easy to undervalue or distrust our imaginations. Fair enough. Scary thought if anybody ever gets a look at where my imagination goes. Sure, you can think of a few in the last week, but because our imagination sometimes goes to distracting, unhelpful, or dysfunctional places, does that mean that God doesn't speak there at all? Clearly not. Just imagine if human beings are imprinted with the image of God, as we are, and uniquely given this capacity for imagination that the rest of his creation doesn't seem to have, wouldn't it stand to reason then that imagination is not a hindrance to hearing God speak, some sort of distraction to get over, but rather the way through which he speaks to us? Images, ideas, impressions. I'm encouraged. Don't write that stuff off. Dreams. Just take a moment. Does any of that resonate with you? Because what we want to do as we move from this place is jump into a process, a stream of where God is at work by listening to his voice. As we end today, we come to our final slide, which I think just gives us something to anchor this all to. So what? What do we do? Again, I used to think I could change the world just by talking and making sense and explaining things. And again, I said, I know it's not enough. In the church and out, we need his power. In the vineyard, we all agree, everyone gets to play. This is how his kingdom comes and his will is done when we partner with him. So what do? How do I learn to speak the language for this crazy line dance? So I think if I'm going to partner with the Spirit in his manifestations of power in increasing measure, it will really help if I have a worldview that includes these things, which I didn't used to. An expectation for him to work through everybody and anybody, including me. That's the first step, and that's happening. I think a second step is to train my habits and daily routines so that I actually pay attention to what he's saying to me. I need to slow down. Ask the Spirit to recenter my scattered mind throughout the day. Asking Jesus to interrupt my agenda with his agenda. And that a lot of work required there. That's a good challenge. I think about fostering a spirit of obedience and faith, as James talked about, so that I act when he speaks, even if the prompting is small. And I know that stuff is contagious. That's why it's good to hear James' story. I want to be around other godly people who are partnering with the Spirit in this way, big and small. That rubs off on us. And I think I need to fill my mind with the anchoring truths of his word. Because his presence, so that the things I end up doing and saying look like Jesus and not just like me. You might notice that, in other words, what I'm saying is to partner with the Spirit, I think I just need to continue to learn to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, so that I can do the things he did and the things he's still doing. So I just encourage you to think, where are the breaks in your chain? I was missing the whole front end of this thing until the last few years. Biblically literate, yep. Increasing life of prayer, cool. Just totally blind to what the Spirit wanted to do and too busy to hear his voice. Maybe you can relate. I want to change that. I hope you do too. And so my encouragement today is that this series, and today in particular, isn't so much about, what is my spiritual gift, meaning like how am I wired to partner with the Spirit regularly and practically. That's really good, really important, really helpful. But I think we're quite good at that, the sensible stuff, the practical stuff. I think where I want to grow, and I hope you want to grow too, is the manifestations of the Spirit in power. The weird ones. Manifestations that are clearly beyond our ability and therefore beyond our control. The ones that Jesus and his followers regularly manifested. Power and authority. Goodness of his kingdom breaking in now. That's what I want. So the question I am asking, and the question I want to invite you to continue asking with me is, what is God doing today? With this person right in front of me, right now. And that answer may be different between today and tomorrow, and that's where we need to learn to hear his voice. But this is how we all get to play. Maybe a prompt to text or call or visit somebody. Maybe a word of encouragement, a prompt to serve, to meet a need, to pray for a friend, a coworker, a stranger. Maybe an image or a word or a phrase or a verse. Maybe a word of knowledge or a word of prophecy. Maybe a prayer for healing. Maybe eyes to see the root cause of something in somebody's life and bring deliverance to that thing. Maybe eyes to see the Spirit resting on somebody in a particular way and blessing that thing. The Spirit works in these powerful ways in any of us, in any way. So, guys, I find that encouraging. I hope you find that encouraging. I feel like God's on the move and he's inviting us to join him. And I was thinking, how can we respond to this in a way that physically models what I'm talking about? Everybody gets to play. The picture with the sprinkles, the picture with the living water coming out. How can we do this in a way that empowers everybody? to have their moment. And this is where the special gift comes. I've asked Charlotte, sorry, it's just, the image is quite powerful. The children are going to come back in the next minute or two, and they're going to spread themselves around the room in little groups of 2 or 3. And actually, it'd be really helpful if someone just went out there to tell Charlotte this would be a great time for her to come in. Thanks, Jen. Wherever they are, they might still be coming across. Now's the time. And they're going to come into the room and spread themselves around the room, and we're going to come to them. To the children, to the young people of this church, because everybody gets to play. And so I want to encourage you as they come in here and set themselves up to think, you can bring your request to these children, of course, in appropriate ways. There's some things that children probably aren't equipped to pray for, but many that they are. In some ways, I think they're more well equipped to pray for the big faith-building things than we are, because they're just, wide open faith. Consider what you'd like to ask them to pray for you, because if you could pull up the last slide here, what we're going to do is you think, what would you like them to pray for you? And you're going to come up to a group of 2 or 3 kids, and they're going to ask you, how can I pray for you? And you can tell them, what would you like them to pray for you? Increased faith, healing, maybe you need some help in your day, maybe you're stressed, whatever it is, be honest with them, and they'll pray for you. But just remember that they're children, and so they take time to think and take time to decide what to pray. So give them space. Adults tend to fill the empty spaces. Don't do that. Say what you'd like to be prayed for and wait. Give them time to pray for you. And then as they do, some of these children may pray a very simple prayer. And that's awesome. Let that sit. And then they're children, so give them feedback and be like, oh, actually you prayed this. Thank you. It's a little bit more like this. And give them some feedback and let them pray again. Come on in, guys. And so I encourage you we're going to leave this up on the screen. Engage with it. Don't rush it. Some of these children, as Charlotte has shared, are remarkably good prayers. And if you rush it, you just might miss the opportunity to be blessed by these guys. And let me just end by saying, if these guys can step out in faith and obedience and pray for the scary adults in the church, there's hope for us. Right? We are a prophetic declaration this morning. If the children can pray, if the children can hear God speak and step out in faith, so can you.